Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone to Sister Wives with MaryJane K. I was researching Professor Jankowiak, the professor who was hosting the UNLV panel with the Browns. And I was looking at some of his research and I wanted to cover some of it. I also requested some additional research, so when and if I am worthy to get that, I might go over some of that too. This is available through ResearchGate, and I will be sure to include the link to this article and the citation in the description as well. I thought we could go over some of the professor's findings in this article and compare that to what we see in the current state of the Brown family dynamics today. This article is titled "The Balance of Duty and Desire in an American Polygamous Community," authored by Professor William Jankowiak, and I sincerely hope that I'm not butchering his name. It's a great study, and we learn a bit about the faith as well from a trusted source. This is a very interesting study, and I encourage everyone to check it out. Again, I will cite the article and leave a link to it in the description. I found it to be very interesting, and there are a lot of correlations between some of his research and the Brown family. But I can be kind of a nerd sometimes with my curiosity and penchant for learning, and not everyone is into that. And so I'm not sure all my listeners will be as into this as I was. I'm going to go straight to the main points and compare the professor's findings with what we see in the current dynamics of the Brown family. But of course, I enjoyed the whole study. I encourage anyone curious to really dig into it because some of you might enjoy it. Okay, so the professor is seeking to examine how the desire for romantic emotional exclusivity impacts the way that fundamentalist Mormon women and men related to one another. More specifically, the professor wanted to know if there are monogamous emotional entanglements between a co-wife, or what we know as a sister wife, and her husband that create complications, or if members in this religious community and lifestyle can overcome this natural impulse to find meaning and emotional satisfaction in their commitment to the larger plural family. I find this interesting because, as we know, Christine wanted the family and not just the man. And she foreshadowed that sometimes women come in and they are more interested in the man, and that creates strife within the family dynamic. And as we know from the last chapter of Becoming Sister Wives, Robin wrote in chapter 4, "I know some people in our faith want a quick courtship and engagement, but I needed to build a better foundation. I didn't want to go to my wedding day and wedding bed with someone who was a relative stranger. In addition to God's testimony, I wanted a romantic love. Some of my sister wives were more interested in the sisterhood than in the husband. But perhaps, since I'd been married before, I knew that I needed a man whom I loved, trusted, cherished, and adored. I also knew that asking for and receiving all these things is hard." Now, we know that before Robin entered the family, Cody and all the wives shared the main goal and priority as a team of putting the needs of the group first and putting the family ahead of the separate marriages or self-interests of the individual team members. Robin was entering a family who all shared a common priority of the team first and the family first. And she made clear her priority was always her husband and her marriage, not the family or the larger team. That was secondary, and Cody's priority shifted from the team and the good of the family to himself and Robin, as the rest of the team, Janelle, Christine, and Mary, felt Cody be less present and invested as a father and a husband. Their priority remained the team and the family, and they found satisfaction in that. But once Robin came in and her main focus was Cody, and he shifted his priority to himself and Robin, that changed the dynamic of the Brown family drastically into something much less functional, much less healthy, and very unstable. And there was a lot of more strife and toxicity, and Robin focusing on Cody in more of a monogamous way, and her making her romantic relationship with her husband Cody a priority completely shifted the family dynamic. It shifted how the wives relate to Cody and to Robin and to each other, and even how the kids in Cody relate as well. So I find it interesting that that was the professor's focus. I find this fascinating. I wish I could take his class. As far as what the professor said during the UNLV study, he said the wives should get along and all put the needs of the team ahead of their own self-interests for a more successful polygamous dynamic within the family. So let's keep that in mind. Professor Jankowiak is going to examine how individuals within the polygamous family, specifically the co-wives, respond to, rationalize, and experience dissatisfaction, and how they find satisfaction in a Mormon polygynous family system in order to explore the social dynamics that account for a family's divisiveness and the costs to the individuals within that family who seek to live in a culture that celebrates the team and the harmonious love of the plural family, the love of the team, the love of the family, over a romantic monogamous love between two individuals. Basically, the professor is pondering what the costs are to the individuals who value the team and the harmony of the family over their dyad and the romantic love relationship between husband and wife. What does the individual sacrifice? In order to study this, the professor is focusing on the co-wives or sister wives and the reasons for the co-wives conflict or the conflict between the sister wives in the family to identify underlying anxieties present within the FLDS polygynous community. Just FYI, polygyny means having more than one spouse when the spouses are women. Polygamy just means having more than one spouse. It's very interesting that the professor delves into the facets of romantic love and how some cultural anthropologists view that pair bond as a byproduct of society's community organization and not a human universal. Other researchers suggest that impulse to form a pair bond relationship is present in every type of society. In most societies, the pair bond is associated with a motivation either for a relatively long-term relationship or marriage. This is not always the case, however. At times, people can form love bonds outside of marriage. So it follows that men and women's sexual and emotional impulse to establish some type of pair bond would impact the quality of the husband and wife interaction. In other words, a husband in a polygamous relationship with many pair bonds seeking to establish other pair bonds, adding other sister wives, or courting would then impact the bonds between the husband and wife and how they interact with each other. Professor Jankowiak writes that since individuals place a lot of importance on the pair bond relationship, the romantic relationship between two, that is a primary factor that causes or creates resentment, hostility, and conflict for the co-wives or sister wives. In other words, because it is innate to form a romantic pair bond, and that romantic bond is innately a priority in humans, in us, and a need, having the partner form other romantic relationships and pair bonds produces resentment and hostility and conflict for the sister wives or the co-wives. It's going against human emotion and natural human instincts to have one partner form other romantic pair bonds, and that creates the turmoil and suffering and strife for the other partner in polygyny. By pair bond, the professor means a recognition of attachment based on sexual intimacy and a deep sense of mutual involvement and belonging. People in a pair bond typically assume sexual exclusivity is important, so partners in a pair bond typically monitor their partner's extramarital sexual behavior, seeking to prevent it. It's inherent and natural to that type of relationship. So individuals in the pair bond in polygyny experience shame and guilt whenever they try to form an exclusive dyadic bond. It's human instinct to want that dyadic pair bond, but there is tremendous guilt and shame because it goes against the lifestyle and the team's best interests. Imagine wanting your partner to be yours and feeling hurt that they sleep with others, and then feeling guilty because you desire a natural human instinct in romantic love, and you secretly desire monogamy, and you feel guilty and ashamed for wanting what is natural because it goes against the faith and the lifestyle. The amount of suffering and pain and emotional upheaval one has to contend with as a sister wife constantly must be so great. Also, on the show, Cody refers to his wives' emotional struggles as their problem. Wives who go to him with their emotional struggles, Cody explains to them, well, you signed up for this, it's your problem. And the faith makes the emotional struggle seem to be a weakness that the women need to overcome to be their best. And if they can't overcome their natural human instincts and emotion, it is seen as a lack of faith and a weakness to overcome. Imagine the mindfuck that is. Professor Jankowiak writes, in many ways, the relationship between shame and its ethical twin guilt is the emotional force that accounts for much of the rage that periodically erupts in the polygamous family. To further elucidate this, he will focus on the relationship between the FLDS Mormon theological notions of salvation, agency, and the pursuit of life satisfaction within the polygamous community. The professor will explore how the religious ideals of salvation, agency, and the pursuit of life satisfaction form part of a unified cultural system that not only fosters the polygynous family form and accounts for the behavioral variation found within that system. He will focus on romantic passion, a lightning rod that divides or unites a polygamous family. Romantic passion can be viewed as deeply troubling or socially disrupting and volatile within a polygamous context. The professor will analyze the interplay between romantic passion, family harmony, and the desire for religious and celestial salvation through self-sacrifice in the FLDS community of Angel Park. This analysis will outline the issues and anxieties that fundamentalist Mormon polygamists face as they strive to achieve life satisfaction by denying their interest in and need to form an emotionally exclusive relationship. Next, the professor delves into some interesting aspects of the faith, such as the placement marriage, that he suggests is an effort to control romantic love's impulse. Before birth, everyone lives with God as a spirit, according to Mormon cosmology. For the fundamentalist Mormon, there is a belief that individuals meet someone in the pre-existent state in the spirit form before they are born, who they are promised to, particularly men and women promised to each other for time and eternity. So individuals have to strive to find their true love on earth and remarry them, in a sense, while they are on earth. Failure to find that true love they met pre-earthly existence on earth, their true love, failure to find that can lead to a situation where one's earthly spouse will differ from one's heavenly spouse. No one wants a catfight for eternity. To be sure that death won't separate the individual from their earthly spouse, it is of the utmost importance that the couple follow God's will. Okay, I have to interject here. Is this why in the book, Becoming Sister Wives, everything is about praying and fasting and signs and symbols and cosmic fate and destiny and kismet? And every time the wives saw Cody, there was electricity or energy or lightning or thunderbolts, or Cody conjuring things deep inside them. Maybe that explains all of the way the wives wrote that book. Either way, in my opinion, it still feels like amateur hour. But maybe that is a validated faith-based explanation for this ridiculous destiny and star-crossed lovers vibes, the God angle, the spiritual fate angle interwoven in that book, because if they aren't sure it's God, they will be separated in death, or worse, there could be a perpetual catfight in the afterlife between your heavenly wife and earthly wife, and no one wants to relive an episode of Jerry Springer on repeat for eternity. That would feel like a level of hell to endure that Groundhog Day. The church elders or leaders, the priesthood council members, are seen as God's representatives on earth, and they are eagerly sought out in matters of the heart. They help the community members find their celestial mates. The priesthood council talks among itself and with the community to sort out individual matters of the heart and to sort out marital placement as well. There are two models of love in the fundamentalist community, and the most common model reflects the notion of romantic or predestined love. I am pretty sure this is the model the Browns use with all their talk of destiny. The other model that is less widely accepted emphasizes agency and individual choice, and it stands in direct opposition to priesthood authority. The model of love that emphasizes agency and individual choice in opposition to the priesthood authority asserts that people are predestined to marry their former spouse or spouses they had married in their pre-existence or spirit state. In this model, it is a given that when the world ends, pre-existence lovers will be reunited. Because of this, individuals feel there is danger to following their personal inclinations, since you could pick the wrong person or a person promised to someone else. In order to avoid this mistake, individuals ask the brethren, whether it be their father or a member of the priesthood council, to pray for insight regarding who they belong to, so they marry the correct person. As a result of all of this and everything, even in the afterlife, spiritually riding on picking the right partner on earth, the youth of the community are warned not to engage in puppy love or crushes or anything to do with the opposite sex. Men and women in the Angel Park FLDS community have different values based on gender. Women talk of the joys and concerns of raising a large number of children and finding and sustaining and enduring love. Men talk of the number of children they will have and the difficulty in finding new wives. I encourage everyone to read this study. The professor includes a lot of telling anecdotes about Angel Park. There is a saying around there that women should be 9 months pregnant, 9 months nursing, 9 months resting, and then 9 months pregnant. This captures the male perspective, and the women use this type of folklore as evidence that the men view their wives as chattel. Some of the women say that the men are quick to live for the principle, but not the gospel. The women are aware that the men are looking to expand their kingdom with obtaining as many wives as possible. Prayer, visionary dreams, and one's own inner promptings are evaluated in an attempt to determine and understand God's will. Dreams are seen as valid and a vehicle of truth, a critical guide used in making decisions. The professor gives some very entertaining examples of women in Angel Park who use their dreams to decide who to marry that I encourage everyone to read. In one example, a woman had a dream, so she went to the priesthood council who verified the validity of the dream, and she married the man in her dream, and the man agreed to marry her since the priesthood council agreed that the dream was valid. There are so many interesting stories, but I wanted those interested to go dig into this with the link at the bottom in the description. I do want to point out that Robin discussed on Sister Wives at some point in the show that she dreamt of her kids before they were born and she met them before birthing them. She also dreamt of a brown-haired boy and she told Cody about it, saying maybe she should have a child. So dreams are seen as valid signs from God and as the truth. And if you dream of a spouse, a man you never met, you can tell the counsel of the dream. And if it's valid, the man will marry the woman as a duty almost. So maybe Robin's odd dreams are a part of the faith's way of thinking. She also mentions she made a list and everything on her list was Cody. And one of the women in the professor's study prayed to have a vision of her promised love. So maybe Robin made a list and prayed and Cody appeared in her life, and to her, he was that list. She manifested spiritually through God. Professor Jankowiak says the women find a 20-year age gap with their partner acceptable, not beyond that, and sometimes the elders agree with the visions that women have, and sometimes the visions the elders have do not work in favor of the women. So some marriages work well while others not. In the unhappy placement marriages, usually teenaged women follow the matrimonial recommendations of their parents or the priesthood council without being emotionally involved with the spouse or deeply wanting them, and the individual enters the marriage assuming love will come in time, almost like in an arranged marriage. In several couples, it takes years and they fall in love way after they are placed. The professor gives some illuminating examples of all these situations at Angel Park. The community stresses the value of obedience and agency or free choice, so youths are taught to follow priesthood recommendations and their own inner promptings, which results in contradictions a lot of the time. If an individual's inner promptings don't coincide with their parents' or the council's recommendations, they have to reconcile the authenticity of their romantic feelings with their religious convictions. Mormon theology is partially derived from 19th century transcendentalism, which stressed the idea of agency. So, accordingly, God's will can be known through acts of private introspection and personal revelation. So, couples are able to argue before the council that they may be mistaken in their judgment, and an individual or couple can accept or reject the council's recommendation. But the council typically responds to arguments and objections by wondering if the arguing individual is led by God or inspired by the devil. This is interesting to me because in Becoming Sister Wives, the Browns' memoir, Cody places a lot of value on praying and fasting in regards to Mary and Christine, and Robin also cites praying and fasting and wanting a sign from God. There is a lot of fasting and introspection and prayer and waiting for signs and symbols. There is also a focus on destiny because of the belief in a heavenly spouse and earthly spouse that you meet previous to birth when you are spirit. and also a lot of emphasis on dreams being validating and truth from God. Also, Cody brought Mary and Christine to the meeting with the church elders. Maybe he feared rejection alone, and he felt bringing his first wife and Christine, polygamy royalty, along might sway the elders to approve of Cody and Robin courting and marrying, and to actually recommend it. The community's formal organization stresses obedience to one's male elders, and the notion of agency serves as an effective counterpoint to that. Another factor in marital decisions, other than finding your former true love from when you were in spirit form before earth, is the will of the father. The father holds religious authority over his family, and because of this, he can influence who his children marry, particularly his daughters under 17. If a man believes he was promised to a particular girl, he will first ask the father's permission. If approval is granted and the daughter agrees, then the couple will go to the priesthood council for approval. There are a lot of details of how men trade their daughters in exchange for another man's daughters and get two to marry them in exchange, depending on the man's position, and men seeking to marry their daughter off to church elders for material gain. It's sickening, of course, but I encourage everyone to read that if they are interested to learn more. Next, we get to the part about romantic intimacy and the desire for emotional exclusivity, and how that natural instinct and human emotional desire works in the context of polygamy in the FLDS community of Angel Park. The professor writes that a woman's desire for romantic intimacy intensifies a woman's want for emotional exclusivity. It results in her advancing her interests and claim on her husband. Naturally, when you're in love and you want lots of sex and closeness, you want to know you are the only one your partner loves and wants in that way deeply and emotionally, and that is exclusive with just you and your partner. And that desire for monogamy will make you want to claim your husband. And feelings like insecurity, jealousy, possessiveness, and on, etc. will pop up. Competition too, because it's unnatural to human instincts to not be the only one. In the Angel Park community, it was previously standard etiquette that on a wife's birthday or wedding anniversary, they will be taken on a trip or a special outing one-on-one, and it is understood by everyone involved that this is a dyadic event that reaffirms the presence of a special relationship. On Sister Wives, we know the wives stress the importance of anniversary trips or dates or birthdays, and it's just Cody and the wives stress the importance of that time to connect and appreciate that relationship one-on-one. And occasionally, there are even family trips with just Cody, his one wife, and their kids. However, in Angel Park, recently the priesthood council suggested the etiquette could be changed for a husband to bring all of his wives rather than just one wife. The professor says the priesthood council at Angel Park stresses that the arrival of a new wife is just as much about her marrying into the entire family as it is about her taking on a husband. This is interesting in relation to the Browns because Christine says she wanted the family. She didn't just want the man. She said regarding Robin that sometimes a woman just wants the man and she isn't interested in the whole family. So Robin would have to be spectacular when she was going to come in to the family and she was still courting Cody. A huge ideal of the faith is the family over the man, placing the family and the team's needs in a place of priority and higher value and importance over your separate marriage and your self-interests, or you and your husband and that dyad within the larger family. The larger family always comes first. However, in Becoming Sister Wives, as I quoted before, Robin wrote, "Some of my sister wives were more interested in the sisterhood than in the husband, but perhaps since I'd been married before, I knew that I needed a man whom I loved, trusted, cherished, and adored." That seems in direct contradiction to not only the faith ideals in general, but the church elders' direction as well. So according to the church authority, adding a new wife is just as much about her marrying into the entire family as it is about her taking on a husband. And here we learn just a little about the spiritual ceremony that is very private and secretive and never shown in the show Sister Wives, and it's barely touched on in the Browns' memoir, Becoming Sister Wives. Professor Jankowiak writes, "The council reminded everyone that their wedding ceremony, highly secretive and exclusive ritual, is organized around the idea that marriage is less a dyadic than it is a pluralistic institution. A fundamentalist Mormon wedding ceremony requires all the husband's wives present and at the appropriate time to place their hands over the incoming bride's hands when she publicly says she agrees to marry her husband as well as all his other wives. When the council suggested that each husband bring all his wives on birthdays and anniversaries, most fundamentalist men rejected that notion and recognized that it's easier to honor each wife's request to be treated as special or unique, even just for one day on special occasions. Professor Jankowiak points out that this contrasts with the religious ideal, that marriage is primarily a procreative institution organized around an ideal of harmonious love for the plural family. One striking point the professor makes is that most young men have to search outside of the community because younger women marry married men with more financial resources and status, or they leave the faith entirely, deciding they don't want to live the lifestyle. So there is a shortage of young women, and many young men have to find women outside of their communities to find a wife. The men become the primary promoters of the benefits of the polygamous lifestyle. They convert these women, invoking religious scripture and secular ideals of harmonious love to justify the life that they have to offer. Many women find this intriguing, and if they like the man, they will marry him and adopt the lifestyle. It's not the religious doctrine that lures the women in, but the man and the intrigue of the alternative lifestyle. Who does this remind us of? Perhaps Janelle, who converted to Cody's faith and married him. Maybe there was a shortage of women in his faith of childbearing age in his church community. Janelle thought it was cool. The Browns were her novel polygamist friends after all, and she was intrigued by the faith, and the lifestyle suited her desire to want to work and have kids without doing all the caregiving. But she didn't marry Cody because she was lured by the religion itself. It was more about Cody and his charisma, and Janelle knowing the lifestyle suited what she wanted for her life as far as working full-time and having kids she could have lots of help in raising. Also, Janelle's mom. Janelle's mom was concerned for her daughter, and she went to meet Cody and his family to see what they were into. And she was hooked by Wynn, Cody's dad, and they liked each other. She converted to be able to marry Wynn, but not because she was into the faith itself or the lifestyle. She just liked Wynn, and he liked her. So Janelle's mom was also an outsider brought into the faith and the lifestyle. Professor notes most women who are converted don't actually agree to take on other wives. Men justify their interest in building a plural family entirely on religious tenets, and the professor says they are hesitant to admit they find erotic pleasure in sexual variety, but he acknowledges that the primary motive for living the principle is religious conscientiousness. Religious conscientiousness is the fundamental reason men and women live plural marriage and create God's model human family system. If a woman wants to get into the highest level of heaven, she must marry into a plural family. If a woman never marries into a plural family, they will go to a lower tier in heaven. The value placed on plural marriage defines and shapes the entire system, and unless you are a plural wife, you can't go to heaven. Men adamantly advance the religious doctrine that harmonious love is superior to romantic love. Despite this, women still use the quality of their husband's affection as the primary base to assess the quality of their marriage. Many older women in the culture warn younger women against falling in love with their husbands because it will hurt them in a plural marriage. The professor states if a woman can become the favorite wife, she can then manipulate her husband and thereby receive a greater share of his emotional time and financial investment for herself or her kids. In the Brown family, we know the favorite wife is Robin, and she manipulates Cody, in my opinion, and receives more investment and presence and emotional time, and also more financial investment for herself and her kids. It's no secret. Cody has said his family is an obstacle to his goals in life, and that his wives are obstacles to his goals in life. We see different levels of presence and investment with Robin from day one, including different courtship standards, a much superior honeymoon, and more investment and interest from Cody in every detail of the wedding as well. Also, Robin got a multi-million-dollar mansion, and she got a nanny for 2 little ones with 3 grown kids and Cody and herself in the house to care for her two little ones. Christine, who referred to herself as the basement wife, a term which connotes having lower status in the family hierarchy, took care of 7 kids at a time, including Janelle's kids, and she was the primary caregiver and homemaker, and she was overwhelmed, and when she asked for help, she was told she had to hold up her end of the deal. She was shit out of luck as in the help department. Cody couldn't help her. No one was going to help her. So the favorite wife gets different standards when courting, a different superior honeymoon, a more expensive home, a nanny, even to live in monogamy with Cody for at least 9 to 10 months using the pandemic and Cody's self-made rules as an excuse as to why Cody lived in monogamy with Robin for so long. Also, even Robin's adult kids are allowed to live at home with not one complaint from Cody. Cody refers to Robin's kids as his kids or our kids. Robin was even allowed to manipulate herself into legal wife status as Cody divorced Mary under the guise of needing to legally marry Robin in order to adopt her kids from another father. Everyone else's kids are referred to strictly as Janelle's kids or Christine's kids. Cody distances himself, refusing to take ownership of his kids as their father, and they notice. Robin's adult kids are gladly allowed to live at home, as Cody incessantly tried last season to force Janelle's adult sons to move out with the excuse that they were 18, because he was frustrated at them being responsible and having jobs and being unable to blindly obey his COVID mandates. So the favorite wife thing is a very real thing, and it can easily destroy the stability and harmony within a family, as it did in the Browns' case, in my opinion. The professor's research found that while some husbands, typically the more educated ones, strove to be fair in their dealings with all of their wives, only in a few wealthy families were men able to meet all of their material obligations, and thus prevent wives from competing over the shortage of material resources. That's interesting because to absorb favorite wife Robin and her 3 kids with her unwillingness to work to pay for herself and her kids as a mature adult, she allowed every wife and kid in the Brown family to have less, fund her entire existence, all of her bills, the separate rental, all stretching the Browns' resources thinner, having everyone sacrifice, making do with much less, as Robin sat on her ass, not contributing to the family's finances, just draining them recklessly, whining about wanting to be seen as an indispensable asset to the group, while simultaneously draining from the team's resources and acting as a total liability. Remember when Cody said the squeakiest wheel gets the grease? The kid whose voice is loudest gets heard if they need new shoes or braces, and the mom's limited budget is done for the month? And remember when Cody said Mariah is the easiest? She never has to ask him for anything or beg or whine for her braces or her shoes or whatever she may need. The professor writes, for most Angel Park families, there are insufficient material or emotional resources to distribute to everyone's satisfaction. Choices have to be made. Some members have to do without. Inevitably, the favorite wife and her children's needs are met first. In most families, wives learn to accept or at least grudgingly tolerate the family's division of affection. I wondered if that created resentment among the kids and wives, because Mary, as a mom of one, always had enough in her budget for Mariah to go to private school or get anything she needed. Mariah never had to be the squeaky wheel. Every need was met, while the other kids of Janelle and Christine, who had 6 kids each, had to go complain and whinge to their father to get the new shoes or to pay for the braces if the budget ran dry that month. Regarding men in the community's feelings towards romantic love, men maintain a stoic, sometimes cynical stance. They fear emotional vulnerability, and they dismiss the value of emotional love, citing it as an illusion and not the best basis for a marriage. Most of the men the professor interviewed had been rejected romantically in high school, so they never wanted to become deeply emotionally involved again. Women are not powerless servants to the patriarchal ideal in all cases. The professor found many women who were a formidable force in checking and rechanneling their husband's behavior. He writes, this is especially evident in the actions of a favorite wife who knows her husband cannot tolerate her emotionally withdrawing or distancing herself from interacting with him. Her ability to withhold emotional intimacy from her husband is a powerful resource of power. In this case, the professor is referring to how a co-wife, the favorite co-wife, knows their husband can't withstand emotional distance or distance in interacting with their husband. And the favorite wife's ability to withhold emotional intimacy from her husband is a source of power, a bargaining chip, a manipulation tool. We know Robin, as favorite wife, appears to be very manipulative of Cody and the other wives, and she manages to uphold Cody's ego as the obedient wife who looks to him as the head of the family, while simultaneously manipulating him, using her favorite wife status and emotional states and ability to read others' emotions to manage Cody and serve her interests, in my opinion. We also know that in the Brown family dynamic, we see Cody as the husband withhold emotional intimacy, distancing himself from the wives and kids who have rocky relationships with him or who are perceived as disrespectful or disobedient to him when they are unable to do everything Cody's way blindly, or they provide healthy constructive criticism for Cody. When Cody withholds his presence and investment from his kids and wives that aren't the favorite kids and wife, Cody views it as a bargaining chip and a resource of power that will adapt his wives' and kids' behavior to his liking, and he feels that will gain him more respect and authority and obedience with them. But it doesn't work. Instead, they give him less authority and they have less faith in his ability to act as the head of the family. And that ends up creating an unhealthy, toxic dynamic, rife with resentment and toxicity, in my opinion. Cody himself tried to remove intimacy completely from his marriage to Christine. And when she expressed that intimacy was necessary for her within her marriage, Cody suggested, "We will see how your behavior is with your sister wives and if you can be a good sister wife." And that behavior was contingent on Christine receiving sex and intimacy from her husband, Cody. We know Cody was not going to bat for Mary, clearly, considering the state of their relationship. And we know Janelle and Christine are close. They have the closest thing to what one imagines would be the ideal sister-wife bond and relationship. The only sister-wife Cody could be referring to regarding Christine would be Robin. So Cody suggested if Christine's behavior improved with his favorite wife, Robin, they could see about intimacy. Intimacy is an integral cornerstone of any unconditionally loving, healthy, stable marital relationship. And that was used by Cody as a bargaining chip to try and change Christine's behavior with Robin. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back among a plethora of straws. And Christine divorced Cody and she left. Cody could get his intimacy needs met with Janelle or favorite wife Robin. He never went without. He had other options. I'm not including Mary because Cody has made it clear repeatedly that they do not have a marriage relationship. And Cody expected, knowing Christine had no other option but him for her intimacy needs, to get those met, that she would change her behavior with Robin to his liking. It's interesting that Cody's manipulations in the form of emotionally withdrawing and distancing intimacy-wise that he uses as a bargaining tool to no avail are techniques the favorite wife typically utilizes to manipulate her husband's behavior. I wonder what little birdie was in his ear. Many husbands in monogamous marriages strive to balance their personal interests with family obligations. In polygamy, the husband must strive to meet the needs of his many wives while maintaining a public posture of male leadership while privately compromising with the realities of polygamous family life. The FLDS community of Angel Park religious standards are organized around a set of values that focus on pursuing salvation through the avoidance of sin, selfishness, and arrogance. Within the family, the religious principles are centered around harmonious familial love. That harmonious love, encouraging respect, empathy, helpfulness, and lasting affection, serves as the principal means to bind the polygamous family. The group focus contrasts with romantic love. Romantic love is tolerated but not glorified as an emotional experience. Harmonious love is the preferred ideal, but it is vulnerable to the natural human instincts for personal sexual desires and romantic desires. The cultural ideal and religious ideal is for everyone to live in one house. Social relations in the Mormon polygamous family revolve around personal sentiment as much as duty. When a conflict arises in a polygamous family, an individual response is unpredictable and it may challenge the social order. Will that individual uphold family harmony, or will the individual seek to satisfy personal gratification? This is true of romantic love, which is such a strong emotional experience that it can overwhelm a person's judgment and reorder their priorities. That's interesting. On Sister Wives, when Cody was overcome by the emotional experience of romantic love with Robin, rather than maintain the priority he and his wives shared of the team over the self, it overwhelmed Cody's judgment and his priorities shifted to Robin and his marriage with her over putting the family first and harmonious love. Personal gratification in Cody's case was more important than family harmony. Cody even took an 11-day honeymoon with Robin, taking from the rotation time with he and his other wives and kids, giving all his time to her. There is a spectrum in how men manage their plural marriage, ranging from shared equality to outright favoritism. Men are the symbolic center of the family, and they must balance each wife's emotional and economic interests. Men are conscious of the impact of favoritism on the family harmony, so most men try to lessen that harmful impact. So, most men spend quality time and equal time with each of their co-wives. The sister wives are always conscious of their husband's behaviors, and they notice acts that suggest favoritism. The women measure the quality of their relationship with the presence or absence of romantic love more than role equity. Equal time is important to the wives. If a husband avoids pursuing interests to sacrifice to uphold their religious principles, the household will be relatively harmonious and stable. The husband in a polygamous family knows that if he becomes too attached to any woman, then it can disrupt family bonds and damage his reputation within the community for being unable to manage his family. Family management falls on the husband. The men understand that if their family has a reputation for being disharmonious, then it will not only be more difficult to attract a future wife, but it will also result in the loss of love of his favorite wife as well. The religious ideals stress the value of harmonious love for the entire family, and striving for that is the goal that makes you a good person. So the men and women experience a great deal of guilt and shame over the inability to live up to that ideal. The men yearn for emotional intimacy and exclusiveness, and that compels them to privately lament that they cannot love everyone the same. So the value of harmonious love is more of an ideal than an actuality. Professor Jankowiak found that most polygamous men invoked harmonious love while living in a monogamous love relationship with their favorite wife. Who does this remind us of? Cody talked a lot about his family being the priority over any individual's self-interest in the family. The team came first, and even during Christine's anniversary trip, when the therapist they brought along to Galveston told them to build a rock tower signifying their marriage and relationship, an anniversary, that dyad between Cody and Christine, Cody bulldozed the assignment and Christine's wishes as well, instead making a rock tower representing the family, even including a rock for each wife, refusing to acknowledge his exclusive marital relationship with Christine at all. Yet, Cody regularly prioritizes his favorite wife and her kids, and the difference in Cody's investment levels and time spent with her and her kids is clearly blatant. During the pandemic, Cody used it as an excuse to live in monogamy with Robin. Her kids get different preferential treatment to Cody's other kids, and Cody prefers spending most of his time with her, even acknowledging her house is the only house that feels like his home, and her kids are the only kids that feel like his kids. He refers to as his kids, taking full ownership, while other wives' kids are typically attributed solely to the wife. And Cody completely disengages with the other wives and kids if he feels that they don't obey him or fully respect him or bend to his every whim. The co-wives struggle with feeling selfish because they want to be exclusive and alone with their husband, which is a natural human instinct. So to overcome this, they encourage their husbands to go be with their other wives, and then they feel abused for encouraging their husbands to live the lifestyle. One woman disliked herself for not being able to uphold her religious convictions. The women feel shame for not being able to overcome their natural human emotions like jealousy and insecurity. They feel shame at not being able to uphold the religious ideal and shame for the resentment they harbor at sharing their husbands. Some sister wives stop believing in the spiritual ideal of harmonious love, and they instead focus on getting their fair share of emotional and material resources. The men and women embrace the principle of plural marriage, but they also seek to hold on to or rekindle the romantic love they once had with their partner. That goes against the ideal of harmonious love and the family's best interest and the healthy family dynamic within polygamy. So there is always a lot of tension around this that creates issues. The majority of polygamous families at Angel Park rarely achieve long-lasting harmony. At best, they remain a cesspool of competing interests that from time to time disturbs the fragile balance that unites the family. For most men and women, their anxiety is constant that never goes away. Angel Park, polygamy has become the embodiment of their religious convictions in the spirit of self-sacrifice that motivates the effort to achieve a humble spirit. For them, there is no greater sacrifice than denying the basic human need to merge with another in an exclusive emotional and physical bond. The struggle to overcome and achieve and maintain a humble state represents a symbol of failing to achieve God's plan for humanity for the residents of Angel Park. I encourage all of you to check out the link in the description to this article, and I want to credit Professor Jankowiak. I found this to be incredibly interesting. I will also put the citation for this article in the description as well, as I stated. I think the study gives us some slight insight into the faith and the struggles of men and women in the lifestyle and what they have to endure. That does it for this episode. Either later this week or most likely next week, I will put out the next episode of my Sister Wives Rewatch, Season 2, Episode 8, and also the next episode of Becoming Sister Wives Book Club, covering Chapter 5 on Mary. I came across this study and another one I requested, and I found it compelling and intriguing. So I wanted to share it with you all, and we learn a little bit more insight about the faith and about the principle, a little bit about the spiritual marriage. Thanks for tuning in. To my YouTube viewers, please like and subscribe and let me know your thoughts down below in the comment box. I will see you either later this week or next week to continue the Rewatch and Book Club. See you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.